Space, a place filled with wonder and mystery, questioned by many, romanticized by stories, and observed by the brightest. For years, we as a human race have studied space, hoping to find answers. And within that time, science and technology have developed drastically, helping us learn more. But with all that we've learned, there still remain unanswered questions. Why are we here? Are we alone? Is there other life? The answer to those questions, as we know it, will still remain a mystery.
Oh, I'm in space. It's hot up here. Hello, Internet. This is Olin from What I'm Listening To. As you can see, I am floating in space. And the reason for that is because I'm going to be talking about a specific style of music that deals with outer space. Simply put, it's called space rock. Space rock is an interesting genre. It started in the 70s as really experimental, psychedelic, and progressive rock. And over time, it evolved into something else, still retaining those psychedelic elements, but incorporating other elements like ambient, shoegaze, noise, drone, and even dream pop. I've always been interested in the idea of outer space and science fiction, so to incorporate those elements with music was definitely appealing to me. And because I love the genre so much, I went through my collection and I picked out 5 awesome space rock albums that are totally worth checking out. So with all that being said, let's get started. At number 5, the first album I want to talk about here is Flying Saucer Attack's debut album. Now, I know I have talked about this so many times. I've talked about this album so many times, I've talked about this band so many times, but the reason I bring it up is because arguably this might be the very first space rock album I'd ever heard. I had just discovered space rock and I was looking for albums and bands that kind of fit that quota of what defines space rock. And looking through a nice long list of bands, I stumbled across Flying Saucer Attack. A name like that sounded so cool and so spacey, I just had to check it out. I saw this album cover and I immediately wanted to hear what it sounded like. It's nothing special, it's just an ominous photo of what looks like a sunset sky. No text, no nothing. What I heard off this album changed my life. It was noisy, it was melodic, it was beautiful, it was just out of this world. Every single song on here is fantastic. Even if it's stuff that's really challenging to listen to for most people, it's still a perfect record to me. I could go on and on and on about this record, but for the sake of this video, I'll just say, go check out my Favorite Things episode of Flying Saucer Attack. I talk a lot more in detail about how much that band means to me and all of their albums. This was my very first space rock album I ever heard. It's responsible for me getting into the genre. It's also responsible for me getting into experimental music. This is an essential album to listen to if you're getting into the genre. And if you like what you hear, I highly recommend listening to everything by this band. You will not be disappointed. At number 4, the next album I have here is by a band called Hawkwind. Hawkwind dates all the way back to the 70s, and based on what I've read, these guys are arguably the first band to be categorized as space rock. But the term space rock wasn't really a thing up until these guys came around. They are an interesting band. They are very progressive and very psychedelic, but unlike Pink Floyd with their beautiful compositions, Hawkwind has more of an edge to them. The members of this band were not only influenced by psychedelic rock, but they were also really into hard rock and heavy metal of the 70s, and they incorporated all of those elements together to create this record. This is the very first Hawkwind record I ever heard, and one of the songs that lives on here is called We Took the Wrong Step Years Ago. Next to that Flying Saucer Attack album, that song was one of the very first space rock songs I ever heard. Even to this day, that song is my prototype to what space rock sounds like.
Look around and see the morning cross at hand. Already weeds are writing their scriptures in the sand. We took the wrong step years ago.
It starts out as a really slow acoustic rock jam that progressively gets heavier and faster to then ultimately slow down. But what makes it sound so incredible is the incorporation of all these keyboards that serve as background ambience. And if it doesn't make you think about outer space, I don't know what will. So if you're looking to get into space rock, this is the band to start with. They are the guys who started the whole thing altogether. They are the reason why Flying Saucer Attack and the other bands I'm about to show you exist. This album is incredible, absolutely worth checking out. At number 3, the next album I have here is by a band called Hum. As I said in the beginning of this video, space rock started out as a progressive rock, psychedelic rock kind of sounding music. But as time went on, it began to incorporate modern elements of modern day genres. It kind of got to the point where space rock had two defining elements. There were bands who sounded really psychedelic and trippy and pretty much tried to harness the sound and feeling of outer space. And then there were those who wrote songs about outer space and included science fiction, spacey themes in their lyrics. And then of course there are the people who have incorporated both of those. Hum is sort of in between that. Hum might not be as experimental or psychedelic as the bands I talked about before, but they are still considered space rock. On the surface level, they're another 90s post-hardcore punk band, but their sound is much more deeper than that. The way they deliver their melodies is very reminiscent of psychedelic music. Not to mention the themes that they talk about are all about outer space. Case in point, the name of the album is called You'd Prefer an Astronaut, and there's also songs like Little Dipper and Stars.
She thinks she missed the train to Mars. She's out back counting stars.
Shamefully, this is a very, very, very underappreciated album. They were just so ahead of their time and their sound is just so unique. The band The Deftones have even said that this album in particular is one of the main inspirations for their sound. So if you're a fan of The Deftones and haven't heard of this band, you should definitely look into it. But also, if you're a fan of space rock music and punk music and haven't heard of this album, definitely give this one a listen. Give these guys some attention. They are fantastic. You'd Prefer an Astronaut by Hum. Such a great album. At number 2, the next album I have is by a band called Duster. Similarly to Hum, Duster is another underrated band that emerged from the 90s. A lot of people who are fans of what we know as indie rock and alternative rock are likely familiar with this album and its cover, but to the general public, no one really knows much about this band. They fall in that third category of space rock bands that I mentioned, where they have spacey lyrics but also a spacey sound. But on top of also being a spacey sounding band, they include elements of lo-fi and slowcore to their music. Some of the songs sound like they were recorded off a tape recorder and are incredibly fuzzy, while others are a lot more refined sounding. But the riffs and the melodies on these songs are so out there. To me, this is one of the best albums to listen to when you're just gazing up at the stars. And as corny as that sounds, I highly implore you to go and try that for yourself. It's definitely a beautiful experience. I heard a rumor that eventually they are going to reissue this album as well as their second album, and I hope they do because copies of them do not go cheap. Absolutely fantastic album, absolutely fantastic band, so worth checking out, as well as Hum, but this band for sure definitely worth checking out. And at number 1, the last album I'm going to talk about is by none other than Muse. Muse is a great example of where space rock is in the modern day. All the other albums I talk about were either in the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s. This album came out sometime in the late 2000s. They got all the elements of space rock. They got the progressive nature, the psychedelic nature, the noise, the dream pop, and even the spacey lyrics. The songs off this album are just so big. It's like listening to an epic.
Lose control of increasing days. Watch envy worst and turn to the rains.
From the very beginning, Take a Bow really sets you in this kind of spacey environment as though you're just floating in the stars. Then songs like Supermassive Black Hole add a funk element to it. And Knights of Sidonia is like the musical embodiment of a space western film. It might be kind of obligatory to talk about this band, but it's a damn good example of modern day space rock music that's not too experimental, easy to listen to, and just rocks. Alrighty then, Internet, that does it for me. Hey, if you have any bands or albums you want me to check out, particularly any space rock bands or albums, leave a comment down below, and if I like it, maybe I'll include it in a vlog. Also, if you like this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It shows the support, and I'll love your face for it. And you can also follow me on Instagram. I post an album on there every single day, talk about it, and it gives you a little bit of an insight of what's in my collection. So thank you all for watching. This is Olin from What I'm Listening To, signing out. Goodbye.